As photographers, we all have our personal photography bucket lists. Now, thankfully, over the past decade or so, I've been lucky enough to cross quite a number of things off of my photography bucket list. Things like shooting from a helicopter over New York City, shooting the Golden Gate Bridge covered in cloud at sunrise, things like that. But there are two things on my list that happen to be in the same place, which is the subject of this video, Iceland. So about a month ago, me and Hannah went and spent 5 days there, and it really was the trip of a lifetime. Now, I have to mention at this point that this was not a photography trip. It was a holiday with my wife. However, obviously I took quite a bit of equipment with me. I took my Sony a7R IV with the 14mm 2.8 and the 24-70mm 2.8, both lent to me very kindly by Samyang. I took my Fuji X100V, my Mamiya 645 medium format camera, and finally my Olympus Muse Zoom. I took some Portra 800 for the Mamiya and some Luminar 100 for the Olympus. So on the first day, after picking up the hire car, when we first arrived in Reykjavik, Hannah wanted to have a bit of a nap as we'd flown through the night. So while she did that, I headed out for a walk and found this ridiculously aesthetically pleasing lighthouse. I did come back to it again later in the trip and shot an entire roll of Portra 800 on it, as well as digital and 35mm. That evening, after we'd had some food, we headed out to try and find the Northern Lights. I used two apps to try and get the best idea of where and when, and whilst it wasn't snowing when we set off, as we got further inland, the snow began to fall. A lot. Unfortunately, after 2 to 3 hours of driving to different locations, all we managed to see was a bit of a green tinge in the clouds. Now, the next day was a day that we were both really excited for, as we headed out to drive the Golden Circle. We started by driving through Thingvellir National Park, visiting Skogafoss Waterfall and having a walk around there before we headed to the Strokker Geyser, where there's a visitor centre, cafe, shop, things like this. The geyser itself is impressive, but as you can imagine, it gets incredibly busy, and we didn't stop long before we continued onwards. Shortly after we did set off, we came across a small clearing next to a field with 3 of these stunning Icelandic horses in it. So we stopped to see them, feed them using the horse feed vending machine that of course was there, and then of course get some photos of them. They truly are some of the most beautiful animals that I've ever seen up close. After that, we then headed to the famous Skogafoss Waterfall, which is not the highest waterfall in Iceland by any stretch, but it certainly is one of the widest and the most powerful. Now, the Golden Circle is hugely popular with tourists, and for good reason. All of the sites are incredible in completely different ways, and I would definitely recommend it to anybody visiting Iceland. Although personally, I would suggest hiring a car and doing it yourself. That night we headed out again, and as we were driving, we both looked out of the window at the same time and realised what we were seeing. Even in the car with the naked eye, we could tell that the aurora was beginning to show, and so we pulled over and I basically spent the next hour like an excitable puppy. There was a lot of cloud cover and some light pollution, but taking this shot in particular was a breathtaking experience for me. Now, the shots that I took were not particularly very good technically, but they mean a hell of a lot to me. Also, being completely honest and transparent with you, I did try taking some shots on the Mamiya, but I got my exposures way out, and when I got the film developed, almost every frame was completely black, and the little bits that weren't managed to be that wonderful combination of out of focus and with added camera shake. So that's for next time. The next morning we headed to the Blue Lagoon, where I literally took a handful of photos. We spent the afternoon exploring more of Reykjavik and actually doing normal holiday things like having some food, having some drinks. The Blue Lagoon itself is busy, but it's also huge. At no point did we feel like we were cramped or like there were too many people there. But personally, I would advise getting an early morning slot, as seeing sunrise there is absolutely spectacular. So the following day, I managed to cross the second thing off of my bucket list, as we made the 2-hour drive along the south coast to Skogafoss Waterfall. Now, having seen it 1,000 times in videos, on social media, things like that, I knew that I just had to visit, and it did not disappoint. We were blessed with bright sunshine, which meant that the rainbow curved through the mist, and it was exactly as impressive as it looks in photo and on video. I shot it from below, and I also climbed what seemed like 1,000 steps to the viewing platform above the 200-foot drop. Also, whilst we were on the southern coast, we stopped at Skogafoss, which is not how you say it, but that's about 15 minutes away and equally impressive. This is the waterfall that you may have seen where you can actually walk behind the waterfall into the cave in summer, but in winter it's far too dangerous and so it's closed off. We did go out again that evening to try and get another aurora show, but unfortunately it was almost complete cloud cover and no sign of the aurora whatsoever. On our final day, we headed back into Reykjavik and to go up to the top of the ridiculously impressive church tower that's name will be on here because I'm not even going to try and pronounce it. The view from there gives an incredible view over the city below, so it's definitely something I'd recommend. We then grabbed a coffee and some food before heading back to the airport with our once-in-a-lifetime trip complete. I would highly recommend Iceland to anybody, but especially to photographers. I do plan on going back there again at some point in the future in the summertime, as I'm sure it'll be like visiting a whole new place. Thank you so much if you managed to make it this far into the video. I am going to leave you with some of my favourite images of all the images that I shot. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I'll see you in the next video.